to Disputes in Perspective, a Reed Smith podcast. This podcast series will discuss disputes-related trends, hot topics, and developments occurring in the global legal landscape, and hopefully provide you with some helpful insights and practical tips. If you have any questions about any of the episodes, please feel free to contact our speakers.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adam Massaro in the Denver office, and I have a special guest joining me. Camille, please introduce yourself.
Hey, I'm Camille Bacon-Schulte, and I'm also a partner in the Denver office with Adam.
And we are both founding partners at the Reed Smith office in Denver, and both had a chance to join early this year. Camille, how's it going so far?
It's been going great. Yeah, it's a great group we put together in Denver. The rest of the firm has been really welcoming. It's been a really seamless transition.
You were in private practice before this, right?
Yeah, I've only ever been in private practice.
All right. And had you had a chance to form or found an office before this one?
No, and actually the fact that it was a, found an office opportunity is really sort of what drew me in the first place. I think that's really special. It's a great opportunity you don't get very often.
What is your practice area?
Real estate, really broad real estate, a little bit of everything.
And within that, then, have you always done real estate or done any other type of corporate work as well?
I started in environmental, and it was just a little too litigious for me. It was a lot of fighting with the EPA, and that didn't sit right. And then I just sort of fell in love with real estate along the way. And I just love how collaborative it is.
When you heard about an office being founded by Reed Smith, what were some of your expectations going into it?
Well, it's an office founding, and it's the first time Reed Smith has been in Denver. So I think I had the same expectations that all of the rest of us partners had, which was that we really need to hit the ground running and make a name for ourselves in the community and sort of build up a presence and a reputation. So that was sort of the expectation of my role going in, just leading with the best foot forward and building the right teams for the right clients.
Now, I know you've lived in some interesting spots over the years while still maintaining private practice. What are some of the spots that you've lived in over the years?
I started practicing in San Diego, moved back to Denver briefly, and then spent 5 years working remotely from a little village in Alaska, right outside Glacier Bay National Park. Middle of nowhere, true bush Alaska. You've got a boat or fly in. We get all of our electricity from a waterfall. So that was interesting. I've closed deals running my Wi-Fi on a generator because we've had a power outage through the whole town. Not that I've ever told anybody that, but it can be interesting. But it's totally doable. I think remote work in the real estate practice it goes well together.
It's funny you say that. I was just on vacation, and we obviously did have some things for expedited filing we had to do. We were en route from the mainland to an island, and so I was able to use Wi-Fi there. I got to the island, and then later on in the day, there was even a pocket where I found a little spot to get out a few things. So it's interesting to sort of see both finding those spots and being creative at the same time. But I think there's a way to balance the two. It's just a matter of figuring it out as well. And if you're committed to it, I think you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's interesting too, especially with sort of broader remote work, because I do think on some levels, practice is tough. And it's especially if you've been in there over a decade, it definitely takes its toll. So I think some of the ability to maintain is to have that ability to be able to check out and be in those different spots. How have you used things outside of work to balance the ongoing stress that is work as well?
You mean like the dreaded work-life balance buzzword, or just sort of like generally how you maintain an active practice in remote places?
Well, I think on the latter point, in remote places, obviously some people, there's a concern, right, that you have to be with the people and the decision makers in person. So on that point, how do you make it work, or how do you make sure that you instill trust so that people feel like you can be accessible in that environment?
I get in some ways where people are coming from when they have that concern, but in others, it doesn't resonate with me personally because my practice is so national. So even when I have practice from an office, and I have for about half of my career been in office, I wasn't often working with people physically in my office. Even before the pandemic and before Zoom was so popular, I was conference calling with people in, Kansas City or, Houston or somewhere in California. And so I was working across a lot of different offices within the same firm anyway. And so for my practice, at least, even if I'm physically in an office, I'm not usually working with someone who is, say, down the hall from me. So whether I'm in another office or I'm in Alaska or right now I'm in Steamboat Springs in Colorado, it's not really different. Maybe there's a greater distance between us, but we were never, next door to each other. And oftentimes our clients are really far away as well. We'll have clients who are based out of New York and we're doing a portfolio acquisition, for example, of properties across the country. Even if I were physically in the Denver office, I wouldn't be, face to face with that New York client on a day-to-day basis anymore if I'm sitting there, if I'm sitting in Alaska. So to me, at least for my practice, I just have never felt like it's that different if I'm sitting in an office versus I'm somewhere remote because it's so national. But I will say I think that is a little bit different in our situation because we are starting an office and we're sort of building up our Denver firm culture. And so I do think right now it's more important to be in office at least a little bit just to get to know everybody and figure out, how we can support each other's practices. So there is sort of that as well. But I'm definitely a proponent of remote work.
And then on the flip side, obviously, work-life balance. In my view, it's a lifestyle. It's hard to just turn it off in that respect. And also, if you want to do complex work, you don't just get to turn it off. That's the upside of all the complex work is that complex problems don't just solve themselves between 9 to 5. But at the same time, that can be grueling, especially a decade, in or longer. So what do you do to balance those two things? Because those two worlds don't seem like they can be reconciled all the time.
Well, it's interesting. And I think that is one of the things that's harder when you're remote because your office is your home. And so you don't have that separation of going home at the end of the day. But also, a lot of my clients really expect me to be available to them, not 24/7 necessarily, but certainly if there's a question that comes up after hours. So, whether I'm working from an office or working from home, I'm still checking my email, after dinner. I think it's important though to set boundaries. Like people are going to respect your time as much as you respect your time. So I'm really careful to block off time to, pick up my kids from school and have some time with them right afterwards and, for dinners and bedtime and all of that. And I think you just have to really just be upfront with your colleagues and your clients that those times are family time and you're going to wear your mom hat during those hours. And if something requires your attention before the morning, you'll get back to it when you can. And just getting out. If you've got a break of 30 minutes and you know that your inbox is going to be silent, just get out, take a walk. Don't be glued to your desk. But it's different for everybody, and everybody's practice is different. So I think it's just important to find what works for you, and just be really open with everybody, so everyone has like aligned expectations of when you're going to be available.
We're in Colorado, so what's your go-to winter sport?
Well, I'm still on the fence between snowboarding and skiing. I've been doing both, which is good and bad. They're really different, and I'm not getting as good as quickly as I might if I just stuck to one. But yeah, one of the two. And I'm in Steamboat Springs, and then Howelson's right across the way, and they do this great program where you can just go ski for free on your lunch break if you're local, which is great because I can just pop out. It's 5 minutes, get a couple runs in, come back, log back on. It's great.
And then summer, what's the go-to sport?
I don't know. The Yampa River is pretty great. I've been trying my hand at river kayaking, which is really different than ocean kayaking in Alaska. So I'm still getting the hang of it. There's definitely been a lot of embarrassing moments, but it's really fun. It's really fun.
And then last item on Steamboat, what's the go-to restaurant for the locals?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I really like Cyprus right now. I wouldn't necessarily say it's purely local, but it's got a fun menu and it's got a good vibe.
Getting back to your practice, so real estate transactional work, but within there, what's the focus?
In recent years, it's been a focus on a lot of data center work, and it's not necessarily one sort of product for data centers. I do a lot of leasing and development operations, also some acquisitions. Within that, you've got, environmental aspects, you've got entitlements, you've got infrastructure, power availability. There's a lot of moving pieces, which I think keeps it really interesting. And the data center space is just constantly growing, and it's super national. There's pipelines, Texas, Virginia, Ohio, everywhere. And so it's just been keeping me on my toes for the last couple of years, and it's been really fun.
How did you get into that area?
I was a senior associate, and a partner came into my office and said, "Here, do this." And then I just clicked really well with the client and with the type of work, and I've just stuck with it.
Is there an analogy? Is it like resort development? What is data center like in the more traditional sense?
It is kind of similar to, before I did a lot of data center work, I did project finance. And a lot of times we were building, these big resort facilities where there's a hotel, maybe a casino, maybe a golf course, a bunch of different stuff all together. And one of the big things was, do you have power? Do you have the lines put in? Do you have water? Do you have, wastewater, sewer, all of that to support these structures that you're building? And then there's questions of construction finance and certain like funding components. And data center work is really similar. Even though it's just these big data halls, they require a ton of water for cooling. Obviously, you need a ton of electricity, which is becoming more of a hot button issue that's affecting negotiations and sort of changing the market right now. Privacy is a huge concern because a lot of stuff that's in the data halls is very confidential to the operator. So it can be really similar. Just the final product is obviously very different, but a lot of the concerns are the same.
And when it comes to data centers, obviously you've got the land. Who are some of the other
Mhm.
kind of players that kind of all have to come together in these negotiations?
Yeah, so it kind of depends. What I'm seeing a lot of right now is rather than the operator acquiring the land and developing it themselves, they will lease the land long term from a landlord who is also going to develop the project. And so you've got that other player. Usually the landlord is going to need construction debt. So you've got a lender, you have to consider their position on, say, lease terms. And then the other big player that's coming in more strongly than ever before is the energy provider, so the local utility. And so you've got those four parties that all have to be comfortable with the way the deal is structured. Um, and it can get pretty tricky, and it's getting trickier just because the market's a little wonky. Lenders are getting a little bit more tense about lending out such huge sums of money, and because data centers are so dense on the ground in certain areas, the utility providers are reluctant to commit to providing X amount of power before a building is constructed, which is obviously a problem for both the operators and the lenders.
And then when it comes to the local city government authorities, things like that, are they involved as well?
Yeah, they're involved as well. Sometimes there's incentives. It kind of depends on where it is, whether or not you need a zoning variance or something like that. You've got to consider noise ordinances. Those come into play. Um, for big campus developments, you often want to go before the various parties in the city government to ensure that you've got the community support you need and that you've got tax credits in place or whatever you're going after. So they're definitely involved. But I would say they're less involved than in some other projects. And that just might be a function of, for example, I'm doing a lot of work in Texas right now, and oftentimes the land that we're scouting is not within the city. It'll be in an unincorporated portion of the county, and so then a lot of the city's regulations just don't apply. So we've been less involved with them just for that reason going forward.
Typically, how early are you involved in the process?
Really early. You know, most of my clients sort of negotiate terms on their own and then come to us to paper it. But we come in when it's just a patch of dirt somewhere. I did a huge project out in the desert, and it's literally just dirt. And you got to get water there, and you got to get power there, and you got to get everything built. And we're there from day one, clear through to the end of construction and getting it operational, which takes years. maybe even as many as 10 years if it's a big campus and it's going in phases. So pretty much start to finish, which is great. It's really fun.
Geographically, it sounds like you have some projects in Texas or some of the other regions you're working in.
The DC region near Virginia is really hot right now. Obviously, California. We're seeing more stuff in Ohio. I've got a deal in Mississippi, of all places, right now. So it's pretty spread out. Nevada, Arizona. I want to say everywhere. There's probably some places where it's not, but they're few and far between.
And then, as far as just understand magnitude of these data centers, what's the best sort of way to think about the sheer size from a footprint perspective?
Well, I mean, footprint is huge, of course, but I think the metric that I like to use is what is the cost to the client? Because obviously, the developer's developing it, the landlord's developing it, whoever's developing it, but they're paying for that construction either upfront or amortized over the initial term of rent as base rent. And each building is about at least $500 million. If it's a hybrid lease, which is a slightly different thing, it's over $1 billion every time. So if you're doing a 12-building campus, then that's easily, or a 12-building campus, that's easily $12 billion of spend for your client. So these are huge commitments, and they've got more work than they can handle. They're just constantly going and constantly building, so it's just huge.
Obviously, you've got a lot of different players. On the legal side, there's folks like yourself that focus on the specific industry and have that knowledge. What are some of the other lawyers at Reed Smith you work with on these projects as far as their specialties and focus?
Yeah, so sometimes in Texas, for example, we'll get very focused in on a really local issue, such as, say, in Texas, oftentimes the surface estate and the mineral estate have been severed a long time ago. And so we'll have someone local in one of the Houston or Dallas offices come in and say, okay, here's what we think this looks like. Here's how to protect your surface rights going forward, notwithstanding these mineral rights that are, below you, things like that. Environmental, like I said, is always a piece. So we can loop in the environmental team, which is great. Sometimes you'll need just more local support. So I'm licensed in a bunch of different states, but I'm not licensed everywhere, obviously. So occasionally I'll need advice for, a land use issue in Pennsylvania, for example. So I'll go to the person at the firm who does that work. So it is naturally really collaborative because there's just so many moving pieces. And I work with power a lot too. We don't generally negotiate the power acquisition contracts directly. We're involved in sort of handling that from a larger picture perspective. But I like working with our power team to sort of better understand, what's market, why is the energy provider trying to you put in this sort of condition, that kind of thing. So as a consultant, they're just super useful, and they've got just a ton of knowledge, which is really helpful.
It makes me think a bit about, I've done some litigation on big natural gas processing midstream plants, which are kind of these similar huge CapEx projects, tons of things going on. And similar deal, you're starting from scratch, from dirt and moving up. Flip side of that, though, is when you have that many contracts, that many players, the risk of litigation is very, very high. And at the end, you have a very, very valuable asset that, has obviously a recovery against. So myself, on the litigation front, I've obviously seen it at the worst. But how do you take steps to try to mitigate that risk on the front side?
Well, one of the ways we do that, and, this works again because most of what I do is, leasing and then development and then operations. Just having the right terms and remedies in the leases is huge. So, for example, in all of my leases, we have provisions for power interruption or power downgrades. Obviously, if there's an interruption of power, you can run your generators for like a day or two. And that's just due to environmental regulations. You can't run them continuously. So you're going to be out of power. If you're out of power, you can't operate, and you're basically sitting possibly in the middle of a desert with this giant building that you can't do anything with, that you've paid $1 billion for. So that is a huge issue. So making sure there's provisions in there that say if the power cuts off or if it's, downgraded, suddenly you have a lot less, even if the landlord wasn't responsible for that, like it's totally out of their hands, whatever, they're still on the hook for it. And if that happens and they can't get it back online within 24 hours, then we have remedies such as rent abatement or being able to just terminate straight up and walk away, at which point the landlord doesn't recoup all of their development costs, and we are also not out of pocket. So that's a big one. Also, generally speaking, we're not going to start paying rent until you get to substantial completion. So we're not really coming out of pocket until you get to substantial completion of the construction. And you're not going to reach substantial completion until the power is there, the water is there, all the other utilities are there, hooked up to the building, operational at the capacity we need. And so that's another way we mitigate the risk. So really what we're trying to do is give our clients enough, teeth and the right remedies so that they're never in a position where they're having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a month in rent for a building they can't use. And so they're not really getting to that point of needing to sue a landlord or, anything like that. Obviously, it probably does happen, knock on wood. It hasn't happened with any of my projects yet. Um, but the other thing is just sort of the general, all lawyers do this, is where, you're negotiating a deal, you're looking at the deal points, you're assessing risk, and you're sort of trying to figure out, okay, what are the risk points? Understanding what really matters to the client, like, confidentiality is another huge thing. And we have a lot of provisions around that. And if I think there's a gap and we just can't fill it for whatever reason, just making sure the client really understands what that is and is comfortable. Because I think litigation is much more likely if a client feels blindsided by a problem versus if they've talked about it, they've talked through it with their counsel, they sort of raised it at the higher level when they're getting funding approval before, hitting go. Then it's like, okay, bummer, it actually happened, but we sort of prepare for this. We built it into our assumptions and our risk calculations. And so, if you can't negotiate and draft around something, I think just making sure that the client is aware of potential issues and has thought about them is the best way to avoid litigation long term.
And then I'm curious, obviously, since the firm has an international platform, are we doing data center work outside the US? Is that something you're getting involved in yet or not?
We do. Our main data center client is a global hyperscaler, and they prefer to remain confidential. But they do a ton of work in Europe as well as the US, probably in a lot of other places as well. They also do a ton of sort of data center adjacent work that I know is sort of more prevalent in our European offices. So it's definitely international. The client relationship lead for this particular client is based out of London, for example. So I think they actually probably did more European work to begin with, and we've just sort of started expanding into the US recently.
I see. To wrap up here, obviously you're a partner, and it's always interesting to me sort of path to partnership. So, was there a moment where you realized, that was both the goal and it was achievable, or how did that hit you as far as sort of you made that investment to take it to that next step?
I'll answer this one honestly, and you might want to edit it out. I have always had my best advancements by strategically lateraling to other firms. It's just the best way to do it. There's people that stay at the same firm forever and they'll make it eventually in, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years. I very strategically allowed myself to be poached by Kirkland & Ellis when I was about a sixth-year associate. Their model is to advance their associates to partnership after 6 years. So after about a year trial period with them, it was just their model to advance me to partner. And so I got to be a partner with them for a couple of years before I decided it was time to strategically move on. By doing that, I'm 10 years out of law school. I've been a partner for about 4 years now. I have people from my same cohort that are just now maybe making counsel at their firms. So I think it's just being strategic. I mean, obviously, no matter what your strategy is, if you can't demonstrate skill and, dedication to your clients, it's not going to work out. I think you have to really want it. And some people don't. And I think that's fine. I think the expectation coming out of law school is, I'm going to go to a firm and I'm going to make partner and it's going to be amazing. And if you don't have that sort of goal in mind, that's fine. If you had that goal and it's just not your goal anymore for whatever reason, I think that's fine too. I just sort of always stuck with the goal and worked towards it in a way that I knew would work for me. And it's been great. I think it's great. And then I think as a partner, obviously your goals are really different and there's the obvious stuff. But I think sort of the less obvious is building really good teams and training your associates and like putting in the time to actually give them the training and mentorship that they need, so that they, feel like fully actualized lawyers rather than secretaries just like editing documents based on something you handed them. That's the worst. That's like the first year stuff. So, it's a good place for me because, associate development is something I feel really strongly about. So I enjoy the role.
And you think you're going to stick around at Reed Smith?
Yeah, no, I moved enough now that like genuinely, I was telling my husband, I was like, I'm not leaving again. Like if I get fired or something, I'm just retiring from the law. Like I'm done making new friends. I'm not this social. like this is a really good fit. I really like our people. The clients are great. I was lucky enough that one of my main clients was already here as well, so that was a really smooth transition. Like I'm not going to roll the dice again. So I'm here until I retire or I get fired.
That's always a good spot. It's funny how, I'm similar. Obviously, I've made moves, and I think strategic moves are part of the business more so than ever before. But the flip side is that's also sometimes you have to move to get the level of independence to develop on your own. Because you have to consider, is there somebody over top of you that is an issue? Are you an ability where you can hire associates and grow? So it's an interesting dynamic. But after a couple of them, you also realize that, they ultimately, you get a much better sense of what you do want and don't. So I think it's like, are you going to marry your first love, or are you going to date a little bit before you settle down? But when you know, which is always a good thing.
Yeah. I said that once in an interview. I was like, look, you spend more time with your firm than you even do your family, especially in the early years of your practice. It's like a marriage. And you shouldn't stick in a bad one. So if it's not the right fit, explore your lateral options. Try again. Don't feel like you have to stay somewhere just because it's the first place you landed. And yeah, it's been good for me. And there's always a reason to move. It's not always just strategy. Sometimes it's just growth potential. I worked for a little boutique in Denver for a while, and it was great training, but they were so regional that the clients I wanted to bring in, we just didn't have the right people for it. And so a more international and just talented platform like Reed Smith is great because you just don't run into those sorts of walls that you might at a smaller firm.
Well, excellent. Well, that's our time for today. So I appreciate you joining, and we're a wrap for this podcast. Thank you, Camille.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
Disputes in Perspective is a Reed Smith production. Our producers are Allie McCardle and Shannon Ryan. For more information about Reed Smith's litigation and dispute resolution practice, please email disputesandperspective@reedsmith.com. You can find our podcast on podcast streaming platforms, reedsmith.com, and our social media accounts at Reed Smith LLP. This podcast is provided for educational purposes. It does not constitute legal advice and is not intended to establish an attorney-client relationship, nor is it intended to suggest or establish standards of care applicable to particular lawyers in any given situation. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. Any views, opinions, or comments made by any external guest speaker are not to be attributed to Reed Smith LLP or its individual lawyers. All rights reserved.